$1. The giant cowboy's voice booms across the dusty square. On the auction block, a girl with a burlap sack over her head stands trembling. The crowd sneers. They see damaged goods, a criminal the territory wants gone. They figure she'll be dragged into the mountains to live out her days in shame. But then she whispers, a quiet, refined thank you that stops the cowboy cold. That voice doesn't belong here. It belongs in a parlor, reading poetry, not in the throat of a killer. The crowd doesn't get it. They see a burlap sack and a conviction. They see an outcast. The cowboy Jedediah Cole sees something else. Beneath that coarse fabric, he senses a fire, a brilliant mind that powerful men tried to extinguish. He knows his community, isolated in the high peaks, is dying. Children burn with fever. Mothers perish in childbirth. Good people are lost to things that have simple cures. And this woman, this ghost on an auction block, she has the one thing that can save them. But her profession is forbidden. If she practices, she'll hang. If she stays hidden, she'll watch innocents die. What do you do when the only way to save others is to destroy yourself? The basement of the Copper Ridge jailhouse smelled of mold and regret. Amelia Foster sat on the hard cot, her spine straight as a rifle barrel even after 3 months of this hell. The burlap sack lay beside her, a scratchy promise of what was to come. Sheriff Doyle's boots creaked on the wooden stairs. His keys jangled, a sad, reluctant song. He couldn't meet her eyes as he unlocked the cell. Time to go, he mumbled. Amelia stood. No protest. She'd learned long ago that fighting only made the ropes tighter. The sheriff slipped the sack over her head. The world vanished, replaced by darkness and the smell of potatoes. The sound hit her first, a wall of jeers and insults from the townspeople. She could feel their hate burning right through the fabric. Someone spat. A woman called her a poison, a danger to decent folk. The auctioneer's voice cut through the noise. We got ourselves a criminal here. Territorial authorities want her gone. Who'll take this problem off our hands? Silence. The kind of silence that stretches and pulls until it snaps. Amelia's heart hammered. No one wants a killer. No one wants a woman who poisoned a patient. Come now, the auctioneer begged. Someone's got to bid. More silence. A dog barked. A wagon wheel groaned. Then heavy boots on the wooden platform. Deliberate, solid. The crowd went quiet, craning their necks to see. $1, a deep voice announced. Gasps rippled through the town. The platform shook as a large man stepped closer. The auctioneer, stunned, finally found his voice. Going once for one, going twice. Sold. To the gentleman in the back. Paper rustled. A pen scratched. In less than 5 minutes, she was legally his property. You bought yourself a world of trouble, Cole, someone yelled. That woman's cursed, another shouted. The giant man, Jedediah Cole, said nothing. His hand, rough but surprisingly gentle, touched her elbow. Can you walk? He asked, his voice low. She just nodded, a prisoner under a burlap sky. They walked through a sea of whispers. Every step was an accusation. Every pointed finger was a nail. Amelia kept her head down, focusing only on the splintered wood of the wagon floor as she climbed up. The leather reins snapped. The horses lurched forward. Copper Ridge and the life she'd known disappeared behind them. After what felt like an hour of just the clop of hooves and the creak of wheels, she finally spoke. Thank you. The words were crisp, educated. So out of place it was like finding a diamond in a coal mine. Jedediah Cole almost dropped the reins. That voice, it was a shock of cold water. He'd expected a broken, desperate mumble, not the clear tones of a lady. He glanced at the sacked figure beside him. This was wrong. All wrong. What's your name? He asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Amelia, she said, then paused. Amelia Foster. They rode on, climbing higher into the pine-covered mountains. The air grew sharp and clean. The world of men and their cruel judgments fell away, replaced by the quiet hum of the wilderness. They were miles from anywhere when one of the horses started to limp, favoring its left front hoof. Jedediah pulled the wagon to a stop. He swung down, his brow furrowed with concern as he knelt to examine the animal. May I look? Amelia asked from the wagon. There was something in her tone, an authority, a quiet confidence that made him step back without thinking. She slid from the seat, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for someone who had just been sold like cattle. Her hand, small and pale, went to the horse's leg. Even with her head covered, she moved with an expert's touch, probing, feeling, testing. Stone bruise, she diagnosed, her voice certain. Not serious, but he'll need rest. Do you have any willow bark in your kit? Jedediah just stared. How, how did you know that? I know many things, she said simply. She found his medicine kit in the back of the wagon. Without hesitation, her fingers sorted through the jars and packets. She mixed a simple poultice, her movements precise, practiced, economical. She was working by feel, but it was clear she'd done this 1,000 times before. This was no common criminal. This was something else entirely. And Jedediah was starting to wonder if the dollar he'd spent was the biggest bargain or the biggest mistake of his life. The sun was bleeding orange through the pines when they finally reached his cabin. It was a sturdy place, built by his own hands from the forest around them. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, a welcome sign in the growing twilight. Inside, oil lamps cast a warm, golden glow on the rough-hewn walls. It was simple, practical, but it was home. You can take that off now if you want, he said, nodding towards the burlap sack that still covered her head. Amelia hesitated. The sack had become a shield. Not yet, she whispered. She sat at his kitchen table, her hands clasped below the sack's edge. They were surgeon's hands, he thought. Long, steady fingers made for delicate, life-saving work. Why? She asked, her voice muffled by the cloth. Why did you bid on me? Jedediah poured coffee into 2 tin cups, the dark liquid steaming in the cool air. Seemed like the right thing to do, he said, setting a cup in front of her. People will say you're a fool. People say lots of things, he grunted, taking a sip of his own. Most of it ain't worth listening to. She wrapped her small hands around the warm cup. The steam rose up, disappearing into the rough fabric of her hood. For a long time, the only sound was the crackle of the fire in the stone hearth. I need to tell you something, she said at last. I'm not what they think I am. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Then what are you? She took a deep breath. When she spoke again, her voice was no longer the whisper of a frightened prisoner. It was clear, strong, and heavy with a truth that made the air in the small cabin feel thick. I am Dr. Amelia Foster, she said. I graduated with honors from the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. I was one of the first women to practice medicine in the entire Denver territory. The coffee cup froze halfway to Jedediah's lips. He slowly set it down, his mind reeling. A doctor. They said I poisoned a patient, she continued, her voice gaining a sharp, bitter edge. They said I was a murderer. But it wasn't true. It was a lie, a carefully constructed trap by powerful men who wanted me gone. Why? Jedediah's voice was a low rumble. Because I wouldn't break, she said, the words spilling out now, a torrent held back for too long. Because I refused the advances of Judge Morrison's son, a man who believed his name gave him the right to take whatever he wanted. When I fought back, I didn't just threaten him. I threatened their whole world, their idea of where a woman belongs. So they destroyed me. Jedediah's weathered hands gripped the edge of the wooden table. You're a doctor, he repeated, the words tasting strange and unbelievable. I was, she corrected, the life draining from her voice again. Now I'm nothing. A convicted criminal sold for $1. He was quiet for a long moment, the firelight dancing in his thoughtful eyes. My community, he said slowly, deliberately. People are dying up here, Dr. Foster. There's no medical help for 50 miles. We've got children burning up with fevers that a real doctor could fix. We've got women dying in childbirth. Good, strong folks wasting away from things that could be treated. Amelia's head, still covered by the sack, turned toward the sound of his voice. He couldn't see her eyes, but he could feel them on him. If you were to practice again, Jedediah went on, the idea taking root in his mind, growing wild and dangerous. And if they found out, what would happen? Prison, she said flatly, or a rope. And if you don't practice, he pressed. Her answer was a choked whisper. People die. The fire crackled, spitting a shower of sparks onto the hearth. Outside, the great dark forest was alive with the sounds of the night. Inside, two strangers sat across a rough wooden table, their secrets laid bare between them. One held the power to save lives. The other held the key to her freedom or her destruction. The choice they made in this tiny cabin could save a community or condemn them all. 2 weeks. 2 weeks of watching Jedediah ride back from the scattered mountain settlements, his face a little grimmer each time. The Mitchell boys' fever was worse. Mrs. Patterson's newborn was failing to thrive. Old man Henrik was coughing up blood. Each piece of news was a hammer blow against Amelia's resolve to stay hidden. She was a doctor. She had taken an oath that didn't care about false convictions or burlap sacks. "I'll do it," she said one evening, the firelight casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Jedediah looked up from the harness he was mending. He'd been waiting, hoping, but he never pushed. "But no one can see my face," she added, her voice firm. "No one can ever know who I am." Jedediah just nodded, his expression serious. "I'll make sure of it." That very night, they devised the system. A small back room in the cabin would become her clinic. A heavy blanket, hung from the ceiling, would be her shield. She would be a voice in the shadows, diagnosing, prescribing, healing. Jedediah would be her eyes and hands, the bridge between her hidden world and the desperate people outside. 3 days later, the first patient arrived. It was Tom Mitchell, a rugged farmer, his face etched with terror. In his arms, he carried his 7-year-old son, Tommy. The boy was limp, barely conscious, his skin radiating a terrifying heat. Behind the heavy curtain, Amelia listened. She had Tom describe every symptom, the sound of the boy's breathing, the color of his skin. Her voice was calm, steady, a rock in his sea of panic. She guided Jedediah, telling him where to press, what to look for. "Pneumonia," she diagnosed finally. "Severe." Her instructions were precise. "Willow bark tea every 2 hours. Boil water with pine needles and have him breathe the steam. Keep him warm, but not too warm. If the fever breaks in the next 12 hours, he has a chance." Tom Mitchell twisted his worn hat in his hands, his eyes wide with a desperate hope. How much do I owe you?" "Nothing," came the gentle voice from behind the curtain. "Just bring him back if he gets worse." Tommy Mitchell didn't get worse. Within a week, he was sitting up, demanding food. The fever had broken. The boy was saved. Word traveled fast in the mountains. Not by telegraph, but by whispers carried on the wind from one isolated cabin to the next. The miracle healer, the voice behind the curtain. Sarah Chen was next. She had walked 15 miles, her infant daughter clutched to her chest. The baby was listless, refusing to nurse, fading before her mother's eyes. Sarah was an outsider herself, a Chinese woman in a land that was not always kind to her people. She came not with hope, but with a final, desperate prayer. Amelia worked patiently, her calm voice guiding the terrified young mother. She explained techniques to help the baby latch, simple things no one had ever told Sarah. She had Jedediah mix a special tea of herbs to increase Sarah's milk production. "You saved her," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as her daughter finally began to nurse, weakly at first, then with growing strength. "Bring her back in 2 weeks," the voice instructed, kind but firm. "I need to check her progress." Sarah Chen became their first true ally. She was discreet, loyal, and resourceful. She began traveling to distant trading posts, using her own network of contacts to gather medical supplies, herbs, bandages, precious chloroform, asking no questions, offering no explanations. She was the lifeline that kept their secret clinic running. More patients came. A miner with a hand crushed in a rock slide. A pregnant woman whose baby was turned the wrong way. An old trapper whose heart was giving out. Each case was a new challenge, pushing the limits of Amelia's knowledge in their makeshift setup. But with every life saved, her confidence, buried for so long under shame and fear, began to return. Jedediah was a natural. His big, steady hands were surprisingly deft. He learned to mix medicines, dress wounds, even assist in minor surgeries, all while listening to Amelia's calm instructions from the other side of the curtain. "You have a gift for this," she told him one evening as they cleaned instruments by the fire. "Good teacher," he replied, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than usual. Their partnership became a seamless rhythm. They were two halves of a single purpose. He was the face of the operation, the calm presence who greeted the sick and fearful. She was the mind, the brilliant diagnostician hidden from sight. By the time the first snows fell, the cabin had transformed. It was a functioning clandestine hospital. The legend of the mountain healer grew. People traveled for days, sometimes through blinding blizzards, seeking the miracle worker in the isolated cabin. Mrs. Henderson arrived half frozen, her twin boys burning with scarlet fever, a disease that had already stolen two other children from her settlement. Amelia worked for 2 days straight, her voice never wavering, as she guided Jedediah and the terrified mother through the delicate treatment. Both boys survived. Mrs. Henderson returned home not just with healthy children, but with medicine and knowledge that saved 6 more lives in her village. But success was a double-edged sword. Success bred rumors, and rumors traveled downhill. In Copper Ridge, Sheriff Doyle started hearing stories, reports of an unauthorized doctor in the mountains. The law was clear: no license, no practice. His job was to enforce that law. But every time he thought about riding up there, he'd see a family he knew, the Mitchells, the Hendersons, their children alive and healthy because of some faceless stranger. His investigations, to his deputy's frustration, were always half-hearted. The real danger arrived on a cold wind from the east. His name was Silas Baines, a bounty hunter with cold eyes and a well-oiled pistol. He carried a stack of wanted posters, and one in particular got a lot of attention. It showed a drawing of a woman with intelligent eyes and high cheekbones. Amelia Foster, wanted for murder, $500 reward. Silas was patient. He bought drinks at the saloon. He listened, and he started connecting dots that no one else had even seen. Mighty convenient, he mused to the bartender one night, swirling whiskey in his glass. A fancy female criminal disappears from the territory, and a mysterious lady doctor shows up in the mountains right after. Mighty convenient indeed. The bartender just shrugged, but Silas saw a flicker of something in his eyes. He was getting close. He could feel it. The scent of that $500 was getting stronger every day, and he would tear this whole mountain apart to find it. Spring arrived like a slow thaw, but it brought a new kind of chill to the mountain. Silas Baines hadn't left. He'd spent the winter nursing whiskeys in the Copper Ridge Saloon, asking questions, listening to whispers, and the whispers were starting to form a name. "A female doctor, you say?" Silas would ask casually, leaning against a post at the general store. "Right after that Foster woman vanished? Funny how the world works." He made a point of visiting Sheriff Doyle. "That reward is still active, Sheriff. $500 is a lot of money. Territorial authorities are getting impatient." Doyle shifted behind his desk. The pressure was mounting. Too many stories were coming down from the mountains. Miraculous recoveries. A healer who took no money. It was getting harder to ignore. He'd seen Tom Mitchell's boy in town, healthy as a young colt. He knew deep down that something good was happening up there. But the law was the law. "I'll ride up there next week," Doyle promised, the words tasting like ash. Up at the cabin, the changing atmosphere was undeniable. Patients arrived looking over their shoulders. They spoke of a man in town with cold eyes and a wanted poster. Sarah Chen brought the worst news. She unwrapped her bundle of supplies, her face grim. "He has a picture," she said, her voice low. "An old newspaper drawing of you from Denver. He's showing it to everyone, asking if they've seen a woman who looks like you." Amelia's hand froze above a jar of dried herbs. "Is he asking about the healer?" "He's asking about everything," Sarah confirmed. "He's smart. He's putting it together." Jedediah, who had entered the room silently, set his jaw. "We need to be more careful." They changed everything. Patients now came only under the cover of darkness. Sarah would stand watch down the trail, a silent guardian. Jedediah cleared new escape routes through the dense woods behind the cabin. Amelia packed a small emergency kit, always ready to run. But sickness doesn't wait for bounty hunters to leave. A spring storm blew in, fierce and sudden. And in the middle of it, a frantic pounding on the door. It was Mr. Patterson, soaked to the bone, his face a mask of terror. "It's my wife," he gasped. "The baby's coming wrong. The midwife." She says she can't save them both. There was no choice. To turn him away was a death sentence for mother and child. For hours, Amelia worked, her calm voice a lifeline in the storm-lashed cabin. She guided Jedediah through the terrifyingly complex procedure of a breech birth. The lamplight flickered against the curtain, a beacon of activity visible from the trail. Their voices, though low, carried on the wind. Mother and baby survived. A miracle, but a loud one. 2 days later, Silas Baines knocked on Tom Mitchell's door. "Heard there was some commotion up at the Patterson place the other night," he said, his smile thin and knowing. "Just the storm," Tom said, his face a stone wall. "Storms don't usually deliver babies, do they?" Silas pressed. Tom just stared at him. "Don't know what you're talking about." Silas didn't get any information, but he didn't need it. The way Tom's eyes hardened told him everything. The mountain folk were hiding something, they were protecting someone, and he was sure he knew who. Sheriff Doyle made his promised ride the following week. He trotted up to Jedediah's cabin, his heart heavy with a duty he didn't want. "Jedediah," he said, staying on his horse, "heard you might have someone up here practicing medicine without a license." Jedediah stood in the doorway, his large frame blocking any view inside. "Just me and the trees, Sheriff. You mind if I take a look around?" "You got a warrant?" Doyle sighed, a long, weary sound. "No warrant, Cole. Just reports." Behind the cabin, crouched in a small hidden cellar beneath the floorboards, Amelia held her breath. Her medical supplies were tucked away in false bottom crates. Every sign of her existence had been erased in the 3 minutes since they'd spotted the sheriff on the trail. Jedediah didn't move. "Reports can be wrong." The sheriff finally dismounted. He spent 20 minutes on a half-hearted search. He looked in the barn. He poked around the main room. He found nothing. Amelia's hiding place was perfect. As he swung back onto his horse, Doyle paused. He looked at Jedediah, his gaze meaningful. "You tell whoever is helping folks up here, you tell them to be careful. The territory doesn't take kindly to this sort of thing." Then he tipped his hat and rode away. The close call left them shaken. Jedediah found Amelia in the cellar, covered in dust, her face pale. "That's it," he said, his voice tight. "It's too dangerous. We have to stop, at least for a while." "And what about the people who need help?" she countered, climbing out, brushing dirt from her dress with angry, sharp motions. "What about the next child with a fever? We just let them die? Better than you ending up in a cell, or worse." It was their first real fight. His fear for her safety clashed with her sworn duty. "You're being reckless," he argued. "I'm being a doctor," she shot back. "A dead doctor doesn't help anyone, Amelia." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and painful. Before either could speak again, a desperate pounding rattled the cabin door. It was old Henrik Johnson, his face white with panic, half carrying his teenage son. "Please," the old man begged, tears in his eyes. "He was stung by a bee. He can't, he can't breathe." Amelia took one look at the boy's blue lips and swelling throat. There was no time for arguments, no time for fear. Safety could wait. A life couldn't. She pushed past Jedediah and pointed to the curtain. "Get him in there, now!" She worked with a frantic, focused energy, her voice a rapid-fire series of commands from behind the curtain. Jedediah, his argument forgotten, became her hands again, moving with speed and precision. They saved the boy's life on the floor of that tiny back room. As the Johnsons left, weeping with gratitude, Amelia and Jedediah looked at each other. The fight was over. "I can't stop," she said quietly. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was who she was. He walked over to her, his face full of a feeling she couldn't quite name. "I know," he said, "and I'll help you, until the end." But the end was coming faster than they knew. Silas Baines wasn't giving up. He started following people who left the cabin, tracking them through the woods. He was piecing together a schedule, a pattern. Sarah Chen brought the warning. "He knows," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He doesn't have proof, but he knows it's a woman, and he's starting to think it's the woman on his poster." The net was closing in. Every life she saved was another thread pulled tight. And then, one morning, as spring was finally turning toward summer, the mountain itself decided to act. A deep, gut-wrenching rumble shook the cabin to its foundations. It started as a low growl and grew into a deafening roar. An avalanche. The sound came from the valley below, from the direction of the Copper Ridge mine. And in that moment, Amelia knew her time of hiding was over. She would have to make a choice, her safety or her oath. The mountain shook at dawn. The roar was terrifying, a primal scream from the earth itself as tons of rock, mud, and snow came crashing down the mountainside, directly onto the Copper Ridge mining camp. Before the dust had even settled, Tom Mitchell burst through Jedediah's door, his horse lathered, his face pale with a panic that went beyond fear. "The mine," he gasped, fighting for breath. "It's buried. At least a dozen men trapped. Some are hurt bad, real bad." Amelia stepped out from behind the curtain. For the first time since that day on the auction block, she stood in front of someone without the burlap sack, without the heavy blanket to shield her. Her face, with its high cheekbones and tired, intelligent eyes, was fully visible. Tom Mitchell stared, his jaw slack. "It's you," he whispered. You're her." "The injuries, Tom," she said, her voice cutting through his shock. "All business. How bad are they?" He snapped back to the present. "Broken bones. Bad bleeding. One man. His chest is crushed. Doc, they're gonna die if we don't get help." Amelia looked at Jedediah. A silent understanding passed between them. There would be no hiding in a disaster like this. No curtain could shield her from a dozen dying men. "Get the medical kit," she ordered. "All of it." They loaded the wagon with everything they had: bandages, splints, surgical tools, the herbs she used to fight infection, and the small, precious bottle of laudanum for the pain that was beyond endurance. The ride down the mountain was a chaotic 20-minute descent through treacherous, mud-slick trails. The mining camp was pure chaos. Women and children were screaming, clawing at the wall of debris with their bare hands. The mine foreman was shouting orders, but no one was listening. It was a scene from a nightmare. "Thank God," the foreman breathed when he saw them arrive. "The healer is here." Amelia jumped from the still-moving wagon, her eyes scanning, assessing, triaging. 3 men lay on the ground, pulled from the rubble, groaning in agony. 2 more were being carried out as she watched, their bodies twisted and broken. "Set up a treatment area over there," she commanded, pointing to a relatively clear space by the mine office. "Get me tables, clean water, and lanterns, more light." Her authority was absolute. The panicked crowd, desperate for a leader, snapped into action. She went to the first victim, a young miner no older than 20, a compound fracture of his left arm. The jagged end of the bone poked gruesomely through his skin. "This one first," she announced to the crowd, her voice ringing with a confidence no one had heard from her before. "Jedediah, get me the bone saw and carbolic acid. I need to clean this before I set it." A hush fell over the onlookers. They had heard stories of the mountain healer, imagining some grizzled old woman who worked with herbs and prayers. They did not expect this. This composed, commanding young woman who spoke of bone saws and acid with the calm certainty of a general on a battlefield. Jedediah was at her side, her perfect assistant. Their months of secret work had forged them into an efficient team. His large hands moved with a surprising gentleness, anticipating her every need. "Next patient," she called, barely looking up as she finished splinting the arm. They brought her the man with the crushed chest. His breathing was a ragged, bubbling gasp. Blood frothed on his lips. Internal injuries. He was dying. Amelia went to work, her focus absolute. The world narrowed to the man on the table in front of her. The skills she'd learned in the pristine lecture halls of Philadelphia came rushing back, adapting to the mud and chaos of a mine disaster. For 3 hours she worked without stopping, setting bones, stitching gaping wounds, saving one life after another. The legend of the mountain healer was being rewritten, right here in the open, covered in blood and mud. Then a new disturbance rippled through the edge of the crowd. It was Silas Baines. He'd been drawn by the commotion, by the news of the disaster. He pushed his way through the crowd of worried families, his cold eyes scanning the scene. And then he saw her. He saw the woman working tirelessly over a broken miner. He saw the face from his wanted poster. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across his lips. "Well, well, well," he said, his voice loud enough to carry. Look what we have here. He strode forward, parting the crowd. That's her, he shouted, pointing a finger at Amelia. That's Amelia Foster, the murderer. The work stopped. Every eye turned from the injured to the bounty hunter. Confused murmurs spread through the camp. They knew her as the healer, the miracle worker. A murderer? She's a killer, Silas bellowed, playing to the crowd. Poisoned a man in Denver. There's a $500 bounty on her head, and I'm here to collect. Tom Mitchell, whose son was alive because of this woman, stepped forward, his face like thunder. She just saved 3 men's lives. Doesn't matter what she did today, Silas snarled. The law wants her for murder. Other voices joined in, men and women who had brought their sick children to the hidden cabin, people who owed their lives to the voice behind the curtain. Sarah Chen stepped out of the crowd, her small frame radiating a fierce energy. You will leave her alone, she said, her voice ringing with unexpected power. Silas just laughed and pushed past her, walking directly toward the makeshift operating table, where Amelia was still trying to stabilize the man with the chest injury. Amelia Foster, Silas said, his hand dropping to the butt of his pistol. You're under arrest. Amelia finally looked up. Her sleeves were stained dark with blood, her face was smudged with dirt and lined with exhaustion, but her eyes were clear and steady. This man will die if I stop, she said, her voice quiet but unwavering. Not my problem, Silas sneered, but it was his problem. Because in that moment, the crowd surged forward. They formed a silent, solid wall around Amelia and her patient. Miners, farmers, mothers, fathers, strangers who, an hour ago, had never seen her face, now stood as her protectors. You'll have to get through us, Henrik Johnson growled, his knuckles white. She's not a doctor, she's a criminal, Silas yelled, his confidence starting to waver. She's both, Tom Mitchell said, his voice dangerously low. And right now, we need the doctor. Silas's hand tightened on his gun, but 20 angry mountain men took a step forward in unison. The odds were no longer in his favor. Just then, another horse galloped into the camp. It was Sheriff Doyle. He took in the scene in a single sweeping glance. Amelia, blood-soaked and defiant, the protective circle of mountain folk, and the furious bounty hunter with his hand on his gun. Nobody, Doyle announced, his voice carrying the weight of the law, is getting arrested today. This woman is saving lives. Sheriff, that's Amelia Foster, Silas sputtered, spinning to face him. She's wanted by the territory. Today, Doyle repeated, dismounting and walking into the center of the standoff. She's a doctor. Everything else can wait. The air was thick with tension. The law of the territory versus the law of the mountain. Then Sarah Chen stepped through the line of men. In her hands, she clutched a folded yellowed piece of paper. I think this belongs to you, Sheriff, she said, her voice clear and strong. I've been holding on to it for 2 months, waiting for the right time. She handed the paper to Sheriff Doyle. He unfolded it carefully. As he read, his eyes widened and a look of profound shock crossed his face. What is this? He breathed. This is a confession letter from Robert Morrison, Jr. Amelia's hands, which had been steady through hours of surgery, began to tremble. The name Morrison hit her like a physical blow. Doyle, realizing everyone was watching, cleared his throat and began to read aloud. Written the night before he died of consumption. It says he was the one who poisoned Thomas Whitmore. Says Whitmore had discovered his gambling debts and was going to expose him. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Even the injured miners on the ground were listening intently. He says he let Dr. Amelia Foster take the blame, Doyle continued, his voice growing stronger, angrier, because his father, Judge Morrison, threatened to disown him if the truth ever came out. The judge covered it all up. He destroyed evidence, bribed a witness, and framed an innocent woman to protect his family's name. Silas Baines snatched the letter from the sheriff's hand. This could be a fake. It's notarized, Sarah Chen said quietly. Witnessed by 2 other servants who were in the room. Robert Morrison's conscience got the better of him on his deathbed. The world tilted under Amelia's feet. 3 years. 3 years of running, of hiding, of carrying the crushing weight of a crime she didn't commit. It was all gone. lifted in a single moment by a piece of paper. She looked at Sarah, her voice a choked whisper. "Where did you get this?" Sarah's eyes were kind. "My cousin is a maid in the Morrison house. She was there. She heard the confession, saw him write the letter. When the judge threw it in the fire, she pulled it out after he left." "But why?" Amelia asked, the question tearing at her. "Why didn't you give it to me sooner?" "Because," Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm, "the woman I met a few months ago, the one hiding from the world, she was broken. The truth would have destroyed her. But the woman I see now, the one who walked out from behind that curtain to save these men, she's strong enough to reclaim her life." Sheriff Doyle took the letter back from the stunned bounty hunter. He folded it neatly and tucked it into his vest pocket. "This changes everything," he declared. "As sheriff of this county, I'm officially dismissing all charges against Dr. Amelia Foster." Silas's face was a mask of purple rage. "You can't do that. Those are territorial charges." "I can and I did," Doyle said, standing tall. "This woman was framed. The real killer confessed. The case is closed." "I'm still taking her in," Silas snarled, his greed overriding his sense. $500 is 500 tons. His hand darted for his pistol, but he never cleared the holster. Jedediah was on him in a flash, his huge hand clamping down on the bounty hunter's wrist like a vice. The rest of the mountain men closed in, their faces grim and merciless. "You'll have to go through all of us," Tom Mitchell said. Silas looked at the ring of hostile faces, then at Jedediah's iron grip on his arm. He was beaten. "This isn't over," he spat as Jedediah shoved him back. "Oh, yes, it is," Sheriff Doyle said, his voice cold as a mountain stream. "You are officially ordered to cease your pursuit of Dr. Foster. If I see your face in this territory again, you'll be the one in my jail. Now get out." Silas scrambled onto his horse and rode away, a bitter, defeated man. Amelia turned back to her patient, but the adrenaline that had sustained her for hours was gone, replaced by a wave of dizzying relief. Her hands were shaking too badly to hold a needle. I need a minute," she murmured. Jedediah stepped in, his voice calm as he took over the final stitches. "I've got this." She stumbled away from the crowd, the weight of her own freedom almost too much to bear. Sarah followed her. "The woman from the auction block is gone, Amelia," Sarah said softly. "She had to disappear so Dr. Foster could live again." Tears, hot and cleansing, ran down Amelia's dusty cheeks. For the first time in 3 years, they weren't tears of shame or fear. They were tears of rebirth. "I can practice medicine," she whispered, the words tasting like a miracle. "Legally." "You can do anything you want," Sarah said, smiling. "You're free." She wiped her eyes, took a deep, steadying breath, and walked back to the medical station. There were still lives to save. But now she wasn't a shadow hiding behind a curtain. She was Dr. Amelia Foster, and she was home. Word of her exoneration spread faster than a wildfire. By sunset, every settlement in 3 territories knew the story of the wrongly accused doctor who had saved the Copper Ridge miners. That evening, as Amelia was finally cleaning her instruments, Sheriff Doyle approached her again. "Got a message from Denver," he said, a strange smile on his face. "From the territorial governor himself. Seems he's heard about you." He paused for effect. "Turns out your medical license was never actually revoked, just suspended while you were under investigation." Amelia looked up, her heart stopping. "Well," the sheriff grinned, "the investigation is over. Welcome back, doctor." She sat down hard on a wooden crate. This morning, she was a fugitive. Tonight, she was a celebrated hero, a fully licensed physician. Jedediah came and stood beside her, his shirt stained with the day's work. "What happens now?" he asked softly. Amelia looked at the faces around her, the grateful miners, the loyal families, the sheriff who had bent the law for her, and the man who had bought her for $1. "Now," she said, a new strength in her voice, "we build a proper clinic, a place where anyone can come for help." Tom Mitchell overheard her and broke into a wide grin. "This mountain could use a real doctor." Amelia smiled back, the setting sun painting the sky behind her in brilliant shades of orange and gold. "Then this mountain will have one." 6 months later, the sign at the edge of town didn't say Copper Ridge anymore. It read, Foster's Hope, home of Dr. Amelia Foster, first licensed female physician in the Colorado Territory. The old dilapidated mining office had been reborn. It was now a clean, whitewashed clinic with glass-fronted cabinets holding organized rows of medicines and instruments. A real waiting room had chairs. People came from hundreds of miles away, their journeys fueled by the legend of the doctor who had been sold for $1 and returned a hero. Amelia moved through her clinic with a confidence that felt brand new. She no longer hid her face. She signed her full name on charts and prescriptions, the elegant script a declaration of her reclaimed identity. The territorial governor himself had come to personally reinstate her credentials in a ceremony that was written about in newspapers from Denver to St. Louis. Jedediah was a constant, solid presence at her side. He was now her lead assistant, his hands as skilled with a bandage as they were with a hammer. Their partnership, born of desperation, had deepened into something quiet, strong, and unspoken. He was in the middle of framing out a new surgical room. The demand for her services had already outgrown the small clinic. Sarah Chen still made her weekly trips, coordinating supplies and bringing news from the outlying settlements. She now helped serve as a traveling nurse, trained by Amelia herself. Mrs. Patterson's baby took his first steps, she reported one afternoon, and the Henderson twins won the three-legged race at the town picnic. Each small victory was a testament to the life they had built here. One day, Sheriff Doyle showed up, twisting his hat in his hands. Got a formal request from the governor's office, he announced. They've seen what you've done here. They want you to do more. They want you to establish a medical school, right here, to train other doctors to serve these remote territories. Amelia stared at the official documents he handed her. The government was offering full funding. They wanted to turn Foster's Hope into a beacon of frontier medicine. They want me to teach, she said, stunned. Jedediah looked up from his work. You'd be good at it. It was a staggering thought, to build something that would outlast her, to send dozens of healers out into a land that so desperately needed them. It would mean staying here forever. Is this what you want? Jedediah asked, his eyes searching hers. She looked around the clinic, at the mountains visible through the window. A year ago, this place was her prison. Now it was her entire world. Yes, she said, a slow, certain smile spreading across her face. This is where I belong. The news of the medical school brought a new wave of attention. Doctors from the East came to observe her unconventional methods. Dr. Harrison Mills, a stern, influential physician from Denver, came to inspect the proposal. He was exactly the kind of man who had once condemned her. He watched for 3 days as she performed a complex surgery with basic tools, taught a class on hygiene to a group of farmers, and calmed a frightened child. Your methods are unorthodox, Dr. Foster, he admitted on his final day, his tone grudgingly respectful. But your results are undeniable. The territory would be fortunate to have a school founded on your principles. I will give it my full endorsement. That evening, as she and Jedediah were stacking donated textbooks in what would become the school's library, he set down a heavy pile of books and turned to face her. Marry me, Amelia, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a fact. She looked up from the book in her hands, a smudge of dust on her cheek. Is that an order, Mr. Cole? It's whatever you want it to be, he said, his voice soft. Their love had grown in the quiet spaces between emergencies and late-night study sessions. It needed no grand declaration. Yes, she said, her voice as certain as his. Yes, I will. They were married 1 year to the day after the avalanche. The whole town, the whole mountain, it seemed, crowded into the finished clinic. Sheriff Doyle performed the ceremony. Sarah Chen was her maid of honor. Amelia wore a simple white dress sewn by the women of the town, but her veil was what made everyone fall silent. Tom Mitchell's wife, a master seamstress, had taken the original burlap sack, the one Amelia had worn on the auction block, which she had kept tucked away in a chest, and transformed it. She had painstakingly embroidered it with delicate white wildflowers, turning a symbol of shame into a work of art. The coarse, ugly fabric that had hidden her face now crowned her, a testament to her journey from bondage to freedom. As Jedediah lifted the lace and burlap veil to kiss her, sunlight streamed through the clinic windows, illuminating the room where so many lives had been, and would be, saved. The medical school opened 6 months later. Its graduates, trained in Dr. Foster's practical, compassionate style of frontier medicine, fanned out across the West, bringing healing to places that had only known suffering. Years passed. Dr. Amelia Foster became a living legend. But for all her fame, her greatest happiness was found in the simple, steady rhythm of her life in the mountains, with the man who had seen her worth through a burlap sack. In the main hall of the medical school, that transformed piece of burlap hung in a simple wooden frame. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "What was once meant for shame can, with courage, be remade into honor." If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales that prove the human spirit can't be broken.